That is one hell of a kick. Crowley with a big ball from beyond the arc. Look at this. A double, a triple, a quadruple tackle on one Sydney player. To Duffield. Duffield just gets a piece of it from 50. Fife got a really nice clear down the middle. Walters! What a leap. Clark, clever tap. Ballantyne over the shoulder. Miraculous goal. Goal of the night from Ballantyne. Looking for their first ever grand final. Fremantle will play Hawthorn in the grand final. Siren sounds.
Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week all the participants are in Melbourne for the grand final, and we'll be having a look back at the game versus Sydney last week with the Purple Haze cheering on the boys to a famous victory, and then we'll be having a preview of the upcoming big game against Hawthorn for the 2013 AFL Premiership. This week we've got Seppo back joining us. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Welcome to have you both over here in the Seppo recording studios in Melbourne, the home of football.
And also with us this week, due back to popular demand, we have Paracleet joining us. Well done, mate. Thanks for coming on board.
Great to be here, boys, and great to be in Melbourne, a beautiful, beautiful city that I'd never been to before, unbelievably.
Excellent. And the Melbourne certainly turned on the weather for us today with the entire four seasons in one day. But first of all, we'll have a look back at the Freo game last week. Fremantle obviously came in as reasonably heavy favourites after having the week off, and Sydney having a bruising game versus Carlton. But obviously there was still a little bit of doubt in some of the Freo supporters' minds after going through something, similar type areas in the past 17 or 18 years where we've had those opportunities. But Fremantle came out victorious, 14 goals, 5.99 to 11 goals, 8.74 with a comfortable 25-point victory in the end. And probably the game final score probably didn't reflect the game as a whole, with Sydney kicking the last 5 goals of the game. So, Seppo, what did you think of the game, mate?
Well, it was an exciting game, obviously, with that opening quarter. I was a bit worried about us converting our chances because we seemed to dominate so much, and to end up finishing on 2 goals 9, where Sydney capitalised with their 2 goals 1, I thought it was a bit of a nerve-wracking start, but I knew once we'd gone to the swing of things in that second quarter that we'd go on and power ahead, and that second quarter is probably, I'd rate as the best quarter of footy we have played all year, and if not as a club in our history. I think it's probably some of the best footy I've seen, and the atmosphere at the pub just went in hand with obviously what the atmosphere at the stadium was like. It was brilliant to watch.
How about yourself, Paracleet? What did you think of the performance?
It was an amazing experience. I don't know how much in detail tactical and strategic analysis of the game I can perform since I watched it through the cloud of 19 years of agonising angst combined with pre-game alcohol. So some of the details will probably have to be fed back to me. But, it was an amazing experience. The crowd was incredible. I've never heard noise like it at a Fremantle or West Coast game here in Perth, or back over in Perth. And the performance of the team was simply astonishing, even if I didn't really appreciate it that much at the time. Every behind we kicked in the first quarter, like a dagger to my heart.
Yeah, I think it was, as you said, it was a very dominating performance in the first quarter, and Fremantle came out the way you'd sort of expected them to come out and really put the high pressure on Sydney, and were able to get the ball inside 50, and the delivery inside 50 and the ability to find a target was really good. And Pavlich, I thought, was excellent early. Even though, as I said, we did miss a few chances, and even guys like Mark Walters and sort of Main, who you normally expect to kick goals from those positions, really, hit the post. And I think it was interesting that they probably didn't adjust for that wind. Like normally we do get that sou'wester coming in over Patterson Stadium, and just about all the kicks went out to the right. And just that night it was a northwester, and the guys just didn't seem to adapt really well to it like they would normally. So it'd be probably pretty important, I think, on Saturday. Looks like it's going to be blustery conditions, that they do get out early and just test to make sure they know where that wind's going to go in the pockets.
It was really noticeable because you could tell they were missing all their shots to the right-hand side, and obviously that was a bit different to what they're used to there. So it was obviously just adjusting to the ground conditions, and I think in that second quarter they got the protection of that 3-tier stand. So I'm not sure if that played into it. They just learned to adjust and correct themselves. So it was great to see them adjust and actually start capitalising, because that's one thing that we just can't afford to miss in a heated game in the grand final.
I think the other interesting point, obviously there's been a lot of talk this week in the press about Ryan Crowley's job on Kieran Jack, and the fact that he was able to keep Jack to really a limited influence, not just in terms of possessions, but also tackles and goals. but I think it's probably a bit unheralded was the job that Mzungu did on Hanbury, and I think it was really important that obviously allowing, like Mzungu doing that, keeping Hanbury quiet was allowing Crowley to stay on Jack, because if Hanbury got off the chain against Mzungu, I think he might have had to do the same as he did the week before with Stokes and Johnson. So by Mzungu being able to do that job on Hanbury, it sort of certainly allowed Ross Lyon to keep that matchup as he wanted it.
I think it was pretty crucial to keep Hanbury, like obviously didn't need to put that hard tag of Ryan Crowley on him. I just checked Hanbury only picked up 14 disposals in the end, so Mzungu did a fantastic job on them, because there's that stat running around, I think we discussed it a couple of weeks ago, that Sydney, when Hanbury get less than 22 disposals, that they lose the game. So it was crucial to keep him down, and it certainly helped. And I think a lot to do with that was obviously our midfield dominance, starting with our ruckman, because I think Sandilands and Clark haven't been talked up enough about their job they did in the midfield, and getting first use and getting those centre clearances was pretty dominating for them, because I really thought that Mumford and Pike would have been a real test for them, but we did get a lot of first use, and it was just great to see that midfield dominance, because that's really one area that I thought pre-game that we could struggle against Sydney, and they've got a great midfield, and a lot of the media was talking their midfield up against ours, and saying it was almost better, but with our ruckman in there, in form, I think we do have the better midfield on the day, and it definitely helped.
I think the other important thing was, even with Sandilands, his ruck hit outs and the ability to touch to advantage was good, but I think just about everyone was so happy to see him taking those contested marks, and just one grab marking, and everyone's sort of been saying for a long time, I wish Sandy could just hold on. And even when he came back at the start of the year, after his long layoff, he was just trying to get his feel. But the last 2 weeks, and particularly last week, everything that went his way, he was just clunking. And probably since the second half of that Geelong game is probably the best we've ever seen him marking it, really, as a ruckman, which is fantastic for the side, and just gives us that extra confidence as well, that when we're in trouble or we need to get that ball out to a contest from half back, we know we can go to Sandilands, and there's at least going to be, at worst, a stoppage, or even a chance that he's going to take that contested grab.
We've got to think about Mumford's children, though. I mean, they're going to have to pay their hex on delay rather than up front, since he's had about $200,000 taken off his next contract on that performance last week. He got absolutely smashed.
Yeah, he did get pants, and hopefully our two ruckmen can do the same. But another critical part, I think, of that first quarter setup for us was the move with Mundy and Fife dropping off the half back and taking those intercept marks and building up play, and just the way we sort of streamed forward from Mundy's class kick and Fife's aerial dominance whenever the ball was put in there. And I know it's that second quarter, Sydney struggled to really get past our half back line into their forward line, and I think a lot of that was to do with the sort of ability for our midfielders to roll back and just sort of cut off all those kicks, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same against the Hawks, because I think that's really helped. It's been a big part of our defence this year.
Well, I think that Hawthorn need to make our midfield more accountable than our last two opponents have.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, when you mentioned there about that, just that lack of drive they had off half back, I thought Fremantle's forward pressure in not only just obviously keeping the ball locked inside 50 down deep, but just stopping them getting that run off half-back. Malcheski and McVeigh have been really good for them this year across that half-back line, and just their ability to stop them getting that easy kick out. I mean, a couple of times we allowed that sort of horizontal kick across the ground, but they just gave us enough time to come back and set up. And, obviously the commentators were pretty high in the praise that they gave Fremantle all night in terms of their pressure and ability to set up structurally. And I think it bore fruit on the night, and we really sort of managed to stifle any sort of run they had out of that half-back line.
I think those structures are key, because whenever they did go for the switch out the back and they did venture forward, there was no options for them. So if they did get a free, they had nothing forward of the ball. So they were just doing a bit of circle work, and we really put the pressure on them and made it hard for them to actually get out. But in terms of their field up the ground when they did go forward, I think White was pretty good for them. He was the only one really pushing hard and had any really effect when they did go forward. And I think he got on the scoreboard a couple of times and kicked a goal and a point, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't. Yeah, he said he didn't convert a lot of his chances, but he was one of the few guys that actually gave them an outlet all day. And I think and you can see why Fremantle, or some people have talked about obviously White as a possibility for Freo. And I know that even late today they were talking about him requesting a trade to Collingwood, which is interesting. But you can see that sort of play would be quite handy and allow Pav to play a little bit deeper. The other interesting point I found was that when you're looking at the way Fremantle are structuring up now, they have all their tall players playing through the corridor. So anytime that Fremantle, the Sydney teams were trying to move back into the middle of the ground, they'd have all their tall players there blocking that corridor run. So they actually stopped, Sydney bringing that ball over, and the intercept marks and guys like Fife and Mundy and Barlow, those sort of guys running through the middle, even Muzungu, were able just to stop that change. So they actually made them keep pushing out wide. And I think it's going to be really critical for the game this week, particularly for Hawthorn, to be able to not only get the ball back in the middle, but,
take them out of the dangerous area.
That's exactly right.
So make them kick it to where you want them to kick it to.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be crucial in the overall matchup. The other one, obviously, was who sort of got off the chain a little bit early on was Walters. He had a lot of shots early in the game, and although he didn't convert a lot, he looked dangerous all night, and probably back to his sort of more dangerous self. And I think that's going to be another crucial area in the grand final this week, because really they've got Guerra and Stratton who can probably play on Ballantyne and Walters, but they're not ideal small forward or small defenders. So
they're running backs, aren't they? Really.
So it'll be a crucial.
Guerra's not shutting anyone down.
Yeah, I mean, he'll certainly go in hard, and he's not going to shirk any sort of contest. But it'll be interesting to see how their smaller defenders get to that. But we'll get into that in a little bit more in the when we get to the preview. Obviously, the other I thought Bird played on Hill, which was no real surprise, but it was interesting that he did get subbed out in the third quarter there. So you thought obviously they weren't happy with the way Bird was sort of going there. And when Gary Rowan did come on him, I think maybe they'll look back on that decision, maybe Sydney, and sort of look, did we make a mistake? Because Rowan looked dangerous in that forward 50. And I know the heat was out of the game a little bit by then, but even early in the third quarter, he was the only guy who looked really dangerous down there as a small forward.
From what I heard from the Sydney folk is that Rowan was really short of a run, and he probably wouldn't have lasted the whole game. So it was sort of a bit iffy of him actually coming in and playing a full game. But obviously, he did look dangerous. But it means that they didn't burn him out, didn't break down, and they can get him right for next year.
He's a gun.
Yeah.
Absolute gun. When did he get so big? He's enormous now.
He's huge. He's 191 or 192 as well, so he's like a quicker version of Barlow.
There was no way that he was that tall when he was drafted. He must have been.
No,
he shot up.
Was he?
Yeah, he was tall, but he didn't have that
really
bulk.
skinny.
Yeah, and I think because obviously
the time of the broken leg, he's bulked up the top half of his body.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think you said he'll be certainly a really handy player for them next year and into the future. So
I remember I have a very good memory. Rowan was actually in our slot in the fantasy draft for that year. There was talk that we were going to pick Rowan.
Yeah,
because Hill was way down to 15 or something. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously the as I said, the game was really over as a real major contest by half time. Like most people, even though there was always the sort of dread of most Fremantle supporters going back to previous times when we've coughed up big leads, but these days with Ross Lyon in there, it's really hard for us, And I mean, you knew Sydney was going to come out in that third quarter, because they weren't, a side like that who's been around defending premiers, they weren't going to go without a yelp. And so it was just a matter of whether Fremantle could hold bay. And Swans did come out and sort of brought the margin back down to about 30 points. And I think the crucial sort of error was probably, even though we pumped up Rowan a little bit, when he missed that goal from about 30 in front, which would have brought it back to 4 goals. And then Fremantle sort of kicked away and got the last couple of goals of the quarter and actually extended the lead from half-time from 37 to 43 points. And after that, you sort of knew there was no turning back.
It was interesting how the players mentally, I think Ross made mention in the post-match press conference about the players, he wasn't happy with the way they sort of just shut off, and it was human nature for them to think about next week and sort of go into self-preservation mode and just take off. There wasn't much run in that last quarter, and I think when you're getting close to 10 goals up, you can see the way they just sort of slowed it down and allowed Sydney back into it. But that's not really going to worry us. If we were really playing in a grand final, we probably would have gone right the way through and smashed them by 60, 70 points. But you can see the players like McFarlane's little stab pass across the face of goal that I think it might have been Rowan that jumped onto that he wouldn't make in the grand final. So
it looked like he was worried he was going to tear a hammy just by kicking the ball.
Yeah, so you could see they were really trying to just watch themselves, and I'm glad that Johnson and McFarlane did get through, because obviously a lot of talk, listened to the commentary about Johnson and his tightness, but it looked like, there's no changes. They're in the squad, and it looks like they pulled through okay. Yeah,
I was a bit worried because I was sitting in block 104, which is about where I normally sit, where the players come off the race, and you could see McFarlane come off at about the third quarter with quite a grimace on his face, and it was a bit of a concern, obviously, with his pass, but he got back out there after that, and it'll be, as I said, it'll be interesting to see how he goes this week, but at the end of the
task
day,
on Buddy.
yeah, and he will have that. You think he will get that buddy match up. So it'll be, but you've only got one game, off, and then you've got 6 months off, sort of thing. So
Go all
they'll
out.
leave nothing in the. They'll leave certainly nothing in the sort of tank, so to speak. So, and as you said earlier, Paracleet, the atmosphere at the ground was tremendous. Like, and, even the commentators mentioned it was a bit like a soccer final. Like normally you get the Freo chant out, with when the game's in the bag in the last quarter, but it was on from literally the first bounce. And it'd be interesting to see how it goes at the GF this week. Walking around Melbourne at the moment, just about, unless you're a diehard Hawks fan, everyone else, all the neutrals, I think, will be going for Freo.
The Hawks fans are keeping a very low profile, I note.
They are.
Town the last day.
And the big thing is what we can actually bring is we're bringing passionate supporters across, so we'll have no Freegles or those, the 50-50 supporters that are there for a good laugh. This will be.
I walked past them in town today.
This will be a good contingent. So whatever atmosphere we had at that prelim towards the end, we're going to bottle up the best of it, bring it over to the MCG and have those supporters hopefully here.
Amazing atmosphere. I was in 105 just next to you there, and I should apologise on air to the old lady that I bumped quite badly, leaping in the air to celebrate our lead hitting 50 points.
Yeah, actually, I think I must have one of those Freegal supporters next to me. I think she came in late and then spent the whole time texting, But irrespective, and you do have to feel a little bit for those Freo supporters who, for whatever reason, either missed out on the ballot or were unable to get across this week. It was really surprising the number of Fremantle supporters. I was reading an interesting thing during the week that even last year Sydney only had 10,000 people register for the GF.
Wow.
And even the year before, Geelong only had 17,000 and Hawthorn only had 18,000. So, and they've got a lot more members than we do. So it's quite interesting to see the level of support Fremantle has for this obviously first year.
Hawthorn got a lot of smoke and mirrors members, haven't they?
Dogs and cats, I think, membership numbers.
I mean, as you said, I suppose any club would take it at the time. But, all right, so we'll move on to team selection this week. Not a lot to really talk about, really. There's only been one change, which is unfortunate for Brendan Whitecross, who obviously did his ACL last year in the qualifying final and has now gone out with an ACL in the preliminary final. And, I mean, you just don't like seeing any players injured. You'd rather have them out there. And obviously for Fremantle, guys like Griffin this year and Kepler Bradley, those sort of guys, and even Ibbo, who was in probably close to all Australian form when he went down with his injury with his Achilles. So you just want to see the best players out there. So it's a bit unfortunate for Hawthorn and Simpkin, who's coming in off a best on ground in the VFL this week. I was a little bit surprised. I thought Anderson might have got the run, but he just gives them a little bit different. If one of their players keep pacemakers in terms of Isaac Smith or Hill doesn't fire, they really don't have a lot more pace, and Anderson does give them that a little bit more, where obviously they're a little bit worried about Fremantle's bulk and size, because Simpkin is that little bit stronger, and obviously he's in his third club, with he's obviously being at Sydney and Geelong before this, so now he's at Hawthorn, where he's a spectator the first two grand finals, but now he gets his opportunity. And for Fremantle, an unchanged lineup this week, so going in with the same 22 from last week. I don't think anyone was really surprised by that, barring any injury. And the three emergencies were Sheridan, Hanneth, and Silvani. Yep. So, any comments on the changes, boys?
Well, I was just thinking about the Whitecross injury. From to put that in perspective, that would be like Ibbotson, having a season-ending injury that he's just had, and then missing out in the grand final, and then next year playing in round qualifying final or something like that, prelim, and then doing his injury again and missing out 2 weeks. So I really feel sorry for Whitecross, but we're here to talk about Freo, and I think with those, the fact that we've made no change means we're at our peak list strength to be able to go into this grand final. I think it's great that we're out of this list that we've selected. Everyone's peaking at the right time. We've got a great mix and spread of talent. We're exposing guys like Neil and Sutcliffe to, potentially one of those two is going to pretty much get a full game unless they sub out for each other. But it's great to see that, Ross has built and timed this team's run into the grand final to perfection. I think there's nothing you can argue about the way we're naming our side, and to have all these guys available is there's not many holes in the list. I think it's pretty good that we've actually got a great coverage and spread of here, and guys capable of Sheridan, Silvani or Hanneth do need to come in. They've all been exposed this year and show that they can actually play the role.
Interesting to see who the sub is. If it's with a high potential of it being wet, you think you'd be strongly thinking about playing Neil from the first bounce, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd have to consider it. I mean, really, you've got Neil and Subin, who you'd have to think one of those two would be considered to be the sub. So, I mean, the they can't play Sutcliffe as a sub because they need him down
But
back.
he's playing half back, so he will start.
Yeah, so there's no question that. So really, you've only got one of those two, and really you've got Subin or Neil. There's no real choice to do it. The only other, and the problem is they won't use De Boer in that role because De Boer will have to come in as a tag. He'll be a defensive tag. Yeah. He'll either play Hodge or Birchall across that half back line. So
Birchall more like
so you'd have to think he would be. So it has to be really on one of those two. The only other, and you couldn't consider Daniel Pearce unless he's not really 100% from the knock he caught last week, and they may say we can come out and do a bit, but you're right. It's going to be very, very hard to sort of pick and you can't go with.
If it was really wet, I wouldn't think it'd be a bad thing actually bringing Daniel Pearce out, because if his run and skills of kicking and everything like that, if they can't be put to good use and if it's pissing down with rain, it's maybe even a smart thing, just bring him on really late when the game has opened up and they're expecting the rain and weather to actually clear as the day goes on. So
I believe the forecast is for clearing. In fact, as a tragics, why don't we check the weather forecast right now, ladies and gentlemen?
And just while Paracleet's doing that, I think the important thing though is that I think Neil is one of those players who comes on well and has an impact. Where I think Subin is actually better when the real when it's going to be really hard at the ball. I think Subin thrives in that environment, and I think I think you have to stay. I think Lachie Neale, even though he did well last week and got his 11 touches in the goal in the last, I really have to think he'd probably get that.
He's shown that he can have an impact when he comes on.
Yeah, of course, Subin's got all those extra pre-seasons that Neale doesn't have.
That's true. He can run out a game better.
I think the more interesting one will be for Hawthorn, because generally they've used, obviously Simpkin may come in as the sub this week, which is no surprise, but they've basically used Bailey as the sub 7 times this year.
They'll sub him off. Yeah.
And he's been the sub, and I don't think when they've got Sandland and Clark out there,
they can afford to do that.
I don't think they can afford to do that with Bailey and Hale.
Well, they could concede the ruck.
The only way they could though is if it's wet. They may say, well, listen, Bailey comes out, we'll use Ruffy as the because Ruffy's not going to be that effective up forward if it is particularly wet. So then they might move Roughhead and play Roughhead and Hale in that rucking position, and they'll move Bailey off. And I think that's probably where Clark will have at least a bit of an advantage in terms of his athleticism across the ground. But it'll be interesting to see how Hawthorn go with their sub as well and how the game opens up. And I think that's why they probably, have those sort of guys there. So, all right, we'll just have a quick. Did you have
partly cloudy, scattered showers becoming isolated during the afternoon. So basically that means that it may rain during the game or it may not, but the deck's probably going to be a bit damp.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be probably harder for you, Seppo, with the cheer squad, mate, getting that banner up without it.
I just hope it's dry at the start and they can do all what it's like once the game starts.
Absolutely. All right, so just having a look through the matchups, we'll start at the back line because obviously it's going to be pretty crucial, the couple of the matchups that we have down there. You'd have to think that Dawson will get he always plays deepest. So, and generally this season, Roughhead's been the key forward down full forward. So you'd have to think that they'd start Dawson on Roughhead in the full-back position.
I would see, for me, with McFarlane being underdone, you would almost think about playing him, Dawson on the number 1 forward in Franklin. But with Roughhead being so tall, and Dawson is our tallest defender by some margin, so really we don't have any choice, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think due to the athleticism of the matchup, and Dawson can't run with the guys that push higher up the ground, you've really got to put Dawson on whoever's deeper and the more stationary targets. It's just a natural matchup. Yeah.
They will rotate between whoever's
deeper, and he doesn't have to run as well.
And as you said, I think with Dawson as well is when the ball comes in high and it's a one-on-one body contest, he rarely gets beaten. But if it's on as you said, on the lead, he does struggle a little bit more, and that's not anything against him. That's just a fact.
It's naturally where he best plays.
And I think those guys, when as you said, he moves up to the half back line, he'll concede that mark a little bit more out there, and probably that's something that's not ideal for Lyon. I think McFarlane will start on Franklin. I think McFarlane had a really good game against him in 2010 in the qualifying final, and really sort of gave Buddy a bit of a toweling up, really, to be honest. And even this season, when McFarlane's been fit, he's been able to keep, I think, his opposition to 5 goals for the 15 games he's played. So
that's a pretty good number on.
Which is sensational. So you'd have to back in McFarlane, I think, to start on Buddy, and then as you said, they've got to look at that matchup as they go through. You have to think Michael Johnson will probably get the resting ruckman in Hale, and Hale's been pretty good up forward in the last most of the year actually, but even since the finals have started, he's been very dangerous up there, and obviously been able to kick I mean, he missed a couple of sitters a few weeks ago, and obviously, but he was no lone ranger there for both teams in the grand final. But I think Johnson will probably have to go to Hale, and it's going to be important because Johnson likes to peel off that and play that third man up to help Dawson out. So it's going to be pretty critical on how that matches up in that regard.
I have a funny feeling that Hale won't be coming forward as often as you would expect because many sides have good rebounding defenders, but our backline is entirely composed. They're all rebounders except for Dawson.
Yeah.
So you have to make them accountable.
Yeah.
And Hale spending time forward and not getting the ball is playing into our hands because Johnson's going to run off them all day.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if they try and if it ends up being Gunston.
Yeah.
Rather than Hale, that Johnson's.
Hale's been pretty good around goals for them though, so they may leave him up there and let Roughhead be that third one that sort of floats a bit further back. So Hale will be almost that permanently stationary target on Dawson, and it'll be Roughhead streaming back, and he'll be almost there.
It may be. I think
that might be a good idea too. More athletic ruckman around the ball.
I think the other thing you've got to consider as well is, and I think you mentioned earlier, Seppo, is about the impact Sandlands will have in the middle. I think most of the time they've been able to use Bailey as a ruckman, and then he sort of ends up being a 50-50 or at worst halving contest or not being, competing reasonably well.
Jumping into the man.
And then they'll work off that. Where I don't know necessarily if when he goes up against Sandilands, whether Hawthorn will want Fremantle, particularly with our bigger midfielders, to be able to have first use of the ball the whole time. So they may have to consider using Hale a little bit more up forward. And Bailey, when he goes forward, is nowhere near as effective as Hale is. So they're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul somewhere in that regard, particularly if Sandilands gets on attack early. Because if we get those clearances out of the middle, it's going to make it very tough for Hawthorn in that regard. So,
and especially when you swap Sandlands with Clark in the middle, once the ball comes to ground, Clark is going to be more athletic and mobile running away with that clearances, at least chasing the ball and following up than what Hale and Bailey will be in the middle.
And I think the three small forwards they'll have down there, or you've got Gunston, obviously, who is going to be a very effective forward. He's probably been their best forward, arguably, in the final series. And he's sort of like a Chris Mayne, not in terms of defensive pressure, but his height. He just manages to get that third forward and he becomes very effective. So
he's a very good player.
Yeah, and I think, Spur might be the player who they may look at going there.
Doesn't he concede a fair bit of height? Spur would concede a fair bit of height to Gunston, wouldn't he?
He does, but Spur plays pretty well overhead, so I don't think he gets really beaten in the air by those mid-sized forwards.
Duffield's a more natural height for him, but I don't think Duffield has necessarily as much.
Spur's going to lock down on someone like Bruce, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, you've got Rioli as well to take care of, and you think that in terms of speed, I'm not sure if Spur will actually match up well or if that's going to be Duffield's job.
I think that'll be Sutcliffe.
Or Sutcliffe.
I think
actually, that's a very good point.
I think Sutcliffe will get Rioli to start with, and then they're just going to have to, they'll just say to Cameron, get him. If you keep him locked down, you don't get a touch, but you keep him down, then that's fine, because
Definitely got the pace to go with him.
Yeah.
More than so than what Spur and Duffy would be. You can see in a straight line running towards a ball that Sutcliffe would be able to keep up with Rioli.
Probably a gut running advantage over Rioli.
And it was interesting.
Rioli had a decent tank. He'd be the superstar that everyone believes.
Cammy can hold up.
Yeah, that too.
And I think it'd be interesting to see because really, last week, although you couldn't really criticise anyone, it was interesting that Lee Spur probably had his best game for Fremantle in the final against Geelong. But you'd probably argue had probably one of his worst games for Fremantle last week against Sydney. Just some uncharacteristic turnovers by him. He wasn't clean with the ball. He dropped it a few times early. Then he
got that knock to that head.
And then he caught one by Munford and came off. But probably just wasn't, compared to the standards we set for him now are much higher than
he was well overdue for a bad game.
And as I said, you can't fault the guy at all. So, but, as I said, I think those in that back line there will be quite interesting to see how they go. Because obviously, they may then look at whether, because obviously they like to use Mzungu, I think, in that sort of as another sort of defensive sort of player, whether and they might consider him on Gunston as a plan B because obviously they're going to have another option if Gunston does get off the chain a little bit because obviously they don't want to get sort of that third or leave Buddy or Roughhead. So I think Mzungu might be the plan B option if
might be an option. I think Mzungu's natural matchup will probably be against someone like Smith or someone one of their harder runners on the wing, where Mzungu's just dominated. Like you think about the players that Mzungu's gone to over the last few weeks. I think we're just talking about the Hanbury matchup. He kept Hanbury to 14 or 15 disposals, and I know in the previous weeks gone by, I don't know if it was Stokes or Christensen he got in the Geelong final, but Mzungu's just done great jobs and not only beaten his opponent, but worked around the ground and actually spread.
He hurts goals, he spreads.
Yeah,
he's a
very good player. So hopefully we don't have to waste
You
Mizzou
listening,
dropping
Braden?
back.
Yeah.
But he can be definitely damaging, and a great matchup I think for Smith on the wing. And the other matchup I'd hope for to see at some point during the game is the Hill brothers on each other. I think that will create at some point in time during the game just a memorable highlight package. It will be great to see the two brothers chase each other down the wing, or
be similar to that.
Backyard footy style, come and catch me type thing.
Similar to that Rioli Jetta one last year where they sort of just chase each other off half back. All right, we'll jump forward to the Fremantle forward line. Obviously, Fremantle will start with Pavlich, Main, Walters in there, Ballantyne. Though Ballantyne started off the bench the last couple of games, and they'll probably put Zach Clark as the resting ruckman down there. Whether he starts on the bench will depend on maybe the weather. And then obviously you've got guys like De Boer who generally plays that half forward type role where we play that defensive role. And I think that's going to be a really critical role with Birchall. Every time we've seen him play Hawthorn, Birchall gets off the chain a little bit.
He got 38 touches last time we played. Yeah. 39 maybe.
And I mean, mind you, most of those times we have played them in Tassie. I think the only time we played them at the MCG was in 2011, where I'm sure most people remember that game where Fremantle.
No, I don't remember it.
Yeah, well, we want to forget it. So particularly when we're leading by 24 points into the last quarter.
I told you not to tell me that.
I was used to that one.
Yeah, but I think it was interesting last week, particularly early on in the game. Even when pressure was on, that Fremantle, like Pavlich led up hard up the ground, we were able to we weren't bombing the ball in, we were hitting those targets up forward. A number of times we sort of got one-on-one matchups, or the lead was in front, whether it was Pavlich, Main, Walters, they all got marks where they were sort of pushing up.
Well, our skills are underrated. Everyone's raving about our pressure, but I mean, not just pressure. Sydney got pulled apart in that first half.
I think the key for our forward entry is the way we structure up with Pav, Main, Walters, and Ballas at the bottom of those packs. Is when the ball goes in there, we're not constantly bombing. Like, we're not a one-trick pony, just bombing to the square and going for the crumb. The way we scored our goals against Sydney, a lot of them were actually those little short chips, or the kicks on the leads, and actually putting it in, like the clever use of space like Hawthorn do, just putting it right into the sweet spots and making them spread and run off their opponents and actually get the marks inside 50.
And I think that's going to be really critical. I think that was what Hawthorn did very, very well last week against Geelong. They were using that
back into the game.
They just used those short passes inside 50, and I think that's probably why they missed a few goals, because they were kicking from that 40 to 50 out. But and I think, as you said, Fremantle need to push forward. The interesting thing, obviously, as well, is that both their key backs in terms of Gibson and Lake either a really good spoil or, Lake backs himself into mark. So if we just bomb the ball in there, when Sandlands gets it, he does tend to bring it down to ground, but we don't obviously, and that, if Sandlands down there, it's maybe a little bit different, but we don't want to continually bomb the ball like Geelong did last week, because it just ended up getting rebounded straight back out the other way.
Lake's not going to be zoning off Pavlich.
No.
You can get some breakaway Pav on Lake, so that's the one thing we don't want to do, is actually bomb it long in there, but hit Pavlich up in the lead and try and make Gibson and Lake actually work.
The end of that Geelong Hawthorn preliminary final, you can only little chip it into space when that space is there, and that space was just as much there because Geelong were knackered as it was because the Hawthorn changed their game plan and started hitting people up. That space that they weren't chipping into for the first three quarters didn't exist.
They're not going to get that space against us.
Not in the first.
It'd be interesting to see how they use Josh Gibson, because whether they use him on the resting ruckman if Zach Clark does down there, or Sandlands, or whether they use Main, whether they put him on Main, because Main generally because Main's such a heavy runner, he doesn't tend to, it's much harder for him to spoil, and I don't necessarily know if they want to have Gibson coming out that further outside 50. They'd rather keep him deeper inside the 50. So it'll be interesting to see how they
would want Gibson within a short sprint of wherever the ball's going. So wherever he's going to want to be 20 metres from, 15 metres from Pav, so he can come out over the top.
And I think it's really going to be important that whoever plays on Gibson does make him accountable and actually pushes. They've got Main named on him, but whoever that person is needs to lead hard and make sure that if that they make Gibson accountable, because if they just sag off him and they don't use him, as you said, it's going to make it certainly much more difficult for Pav in that regard.
Take your Fremantle hat off and put your neutral footy watcher hat on. I think Hawthorn have got problems in their back line.
Definitely, and that's why their defence isn't as good as how's ours been this year, because they are showing a bit of weakness, and without Schoenmakers out there, and they've had injuries to Suckling and others, that they do have a bit of a weakness down the back, and I think we can exploit it with the way that the guys will actually line up and actually put pressure on them when we've got a resting ruckman down there.
If we get quick ball into the forward line and they don't have time to get extra numbers back, we'll cut them apart.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think the interesting thing is the matchups. Like last week, we were talking about Sydney struggling for matchups against Fremantle's smaller guys, and I think Walters sort of exposed that a little bit last week. And I think this week, when you look at it, Guerra is probably going to be down there, and how they use Birchall, because obviously if they've got Walters and Ballantyne deep, Stratton you'd have to think would probably play on one of those.
Main
Well, Stratton may go to Main, and then so obviously who's going to be that other defender down back, and I think that's going to cause them a little bit of heartache. And I think every week you sort of you see Jeremy Burton on the Foxtel, and he loves the Walters and loves Mundy, but I think he also realises that they really don't have a strong matchup for one of those guys. So
they've got one too many Duffields in their team.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose Guerra's going to go to the best if that's going to be Walters or Ballantyne. I think whoever's playing deeper, I think you see Ballantyne more than often not playing that deep crumbing role, and Walters seems to rotate a bit through the midfield and delivering that ball in there. But as the ball shifts in there, it seems to swap. And Ballas runs to the bench and tries to mix it up. So it's great that we can actually interchange those two between who's crumbing at the bottom of the pack and applying that forward pressure to the guy that's running up the field. So I think we can actually stretch those guys out. And if it's Guerra the only one, I don't know if I have Burgoyne or Birchall having to come back and actually cover the two. But if we can get both in there at the same time, it's going to cause them headaches.
Yeah. I really think Burgoyne's a critical player for Hawthorn. He not only has really good pace out of the contest, but he finishes well. And I think that's going to be Mzungu's matchup. I think just in terms of size, body, I think he's actually got the ability to play on Burgoyne, and I think he's one of their more dangerous players. I know people will talk about Smith and that sort of stuff, and I agree that his pace is going to hurt us, or could potentially hurt us, but if you make him work the other way, where Burgoyne just has that ability not only to break because he's strong at the contest, but he has really good skills and can open teams up through his kicking, and I just really reckon that he'll be someone Lyon will lock down on. Obviously, going back, we'll just have a quick look at obviously the midfields. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk this week, particularly from Lyon and that about games won and lost in the midfield. Fremantle have a decisive edge in the terms of height. I think Hawthorn's tallest midfielder is 186.
Really?
Yeah. So
I've done my research.
Yeah, where obviously Hawthorn don't have where we've got probably 4 players above that height. So
I think our shortest is 189, isn't it? Barlow's 189.
Mzungu's 182 along with Hill, so they're both 182s. But as you said,
they're not centre square players.
No, but in the centre square, if you've got you said Crowley, Barlow, Fife, and Mundy, they're all that 188 plus.
Yeah, well, Jordan Lewis is 186, so if you call Liam Muir tallest midfielder, I think we've got them covered above his height with Mundy, Fife, Barlow.
And you've got Sewell, Hodge, Mitchell. Those sort of guys aren't really super tall players, and even Brad Hill himself, I think, is only 179. So he's not a really tall player, but he's obviously going to have that height there. So I think we're going to have the edge in terms of the contest, and obviously if it's a wet day, those bigger bodies will, they're as tough as nails, Hawthorn players. I mean, their experienced bodies are all 29, 30 plus years old. So, but it does keep, you keep hammering them all day. It's certainly going to have an impact.
You do have a bit of an edge in class, I think, over Hawthorn in the midfield. I mean, Lewis and Sewell are very, very good players, but they're not. Are they A grade?
Lewis can be very good with this kid. This is the thing is their kicking skills across the board with Mitchell and his composure, and Hodge the way he sets up and makes decisions and goes in hard off half back. They do have some very good skills, and most of them you could sort of throw into the A grade category. But I think it's with the conditions and how much pressure there'll be on the gameplay. You still expect Mitch to be good, but I think Lewis and Sewell can probably be shown wanting if we can put the pressure on them and a bit of a wet.
That's what I'm angling at. I'm not saying they're great players, but they're just a level short.
Yeah,
of that truly great player.
I think it depends on what you're looking at. I think their kicking is better than our kicking in the midfield. I really think. I think our midfield are very we've been gaining a lot of our ascendancy through winning the clearance and kicking it long and then locking it in. Where I think their midfield is probably they haven't got many kicks who aren't elite, who couldn't hit target. And I think that's obviously why their game plan, they match around that where they have those short 20, 25 metre passes because they hit them all day long. So I think we have an edge.
They can all kick, apart from Sewell.
Yeah, I mean, and even guys like Barlow and that sort of thing.
Well, Barlow is not going to be hitting up 40-metre
Yeah.
pinpoint passes. He's
No.
not.
But Barlow does have a skill level like Mitchell with a bit of composure in hand and extracting the ball out there.
Yeah.
I think that's one of Hawthorn's crucial ways they actually won their game last week with Mitchell with the composure, the way he delivered the ball out and obviously getting it in there. I think Barlow's got that on the inside with his hands, not so much with his kicking. But yeah, they are still a skillful side. Now, if you were to summarise Hawthorn's midfield, you'd say they'd be very skillful compared to us, where it's just workmanlike.
Yeah, exactly right. It's probably
our midfield is skillful. It's just it's not that.
Not as
It's
polished
not, it's
and
not
not
an A grade
used,
skillful.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit like I think Robert Murphy had in the Age this week. Two boxes where one's got that skillful movement and the other one's just a brute. And I think Fremantle's midfield, you could be just like they're just the big bodies. They work hard, and I mean their skills
are we Foreman or Fraser here? Because I think I want to be Fraser.
Yeah, but they are. I mean, in that regard, like it's just as you said, they've got different skill sets. I mean, but they are both really hard at the contest. So, and I mean, as you said, I think that'll be where it's won and lost. Liam Shields, for example, is he's going to get the tagging role. I mean, that's going to be his job. So you'd have to think he'll go to Hill. I mean, he's been there in the past. I think they'll start with that matchup.
I think it's wrong. I think you should just roll the dice on Hill and send Shields to Monday.
Problem is that Shields is too small. He won't match up well on Monday. He won't be able to beat him. And the problem is when you put Shields in that position, that means he's going to be in the centre square, and they can't.
And other guys are going to get off the chain like Hill and Pearce. You're leaving them on the outside.
We've started rotating our midfielders constantly now.
Yeah,
I can't remember the last time Mondays actually copped a hard tag. It's really just been like we do to other players. We attack their ball users and runners. And
he did cop a tag at around about, I can't remember who it was against, about 13 or 14, and he struggled a little bit with it. But then, as you said, if you tag, you can't keep
someone else will get off. I think Hill got off the day that Monday got tagged.
Yeah.
So.
And I think they know that if Hill gets 20, 25 touches,
they're damaging,
and will probably go close to winning the game where other players don't get it.
Let's surf the database. How many times has Hill had more than 20 possessions and Fremantle lost?
Yeah,
a good number.
Wouldn't be too many. So I think that's going to be a crucial. So how they use Shields, and I think obviously it's how they're going to go back to back with, or whether they go head to head with like someone like Daniel Pearce versus Isaac Smith, or whether they, as you said earlier, they may use Mzungu in that role to try and curb Smith, because Smith is one of those players that does give them good metres, and that's really what they need, someone who can not only run, be one of those 80-metre players, run 30, kick 50, and they haven't got a lot of them like Hawthorn, and that's really why I was probably a little bit surprised they didn't consider Anderson this week in the side, because they really don't have many of those 80-metre players, where we actually have quite a few more than that, but we probably don't, as I said, have that touch class in the kicking.
I suppose they're backing Hill in, young Bradley Hill, because he could be similar to that.
Yeah, and I mean, like, he looked a bit awestruck the first final, but he played very, very well last week against Geelong, so it'll certainly be and sometimes, as you said, with the two brothers on each other, it'll be interesting to see if they do go through and have a look at that.
It's a lively little player, Hill.
Yeah, I like him.
I mean, I think the other thing that's really...
His kicking skills not in the same park as his brother, but everything else is pretty good.
I think the other important thing that you look at is when you go through and look at their side, realistically they're going to have... It's what guys apart from that are going to be able to rotate through the midfield. So if you look at Hawthorn, for example, just about all their forwards, Rioli can go in there at a pinch, but generally Bruce, Popolo, Roughhead, Franklin and Hale, and Hale's a ruckman, but they don't have anyone else who can sort of rotate through the middle there. So they've obviously got Sewell and Hodge, then you've got Smith, Mitchell, Lewis, and even on the bench you've got Simpkin can come in off if he's not the sub, and you've got Hill and Shields. I think we've got a little bit deeper in terms of the number of midfielders that we could rotate through there. So it'd be interesting to see how on the day whether Fremantle do get a little bit of an edge there. I think Bruce is going to be probably one of those key players. He seems to sneak under the guard every week, but he always manages. And particularly in the last 5 minutes of quarters, if you watch constantly, Luke Bruce always in the last 3 or 4 minutes of a quarter gets a kick for goal consistently. I mean, his set shots last week were terrible, but he gets a lot of the ball in those last 5 minutes when just the opposing defender slacks off a little bit, relaxes, he manages to get through there. So
I only watched the end of that game last week, and when I turned the telly on, it was Bruce having a kick for goal, which I think then came off his shin and only just snuck in from behind.
Yeah. So, and obviously the last part we just talked about a little bit earlier was in the ruck, and obviously Sandlands and Clark versus Bailey and Hale and slash Roughhead, who can probably go in there at a pinch, where we really only have the two guys who can do it. So,
and when you think of that Sandilands and Clark combination over the last few weeks, they've racked up, I think, 50 hit-outs against Geelong and then 53 against the Sydney Ruckman. So against similar class opposition, depending on the conditions, I think, again, we can hopefully win that fair share of the ruck hit-outs. And they've just been dominant. They're in form. And like I said before, it's just so good to see Sandilands actually finally clunking them back to his best.
I hear talk that they're planning on playing Hale on Bailey's shoulders.
Just to match.
Yeah.
They're going to need to.
It certainly will be an interesting game. And obviously, last year they were talking, quite a bit about, this week about Hawthorn losing last year and wanting to sort of get back in there. But there's also been lots of talk about teams who this is their first time in the big dance, and they've managed to go through and win it as well. So
I haven't confirmed, but aren't the last 3 teams to play in their first grand final?
I know Port Adelaide
and Brisbane.
won their first. Brisbane won their first.
Yeah.
So there are teams out there who have done it. So it's not like we're going to new territory.
No.
Teams have done it before. We can do it. And Ross has drummed into it. We've got a game plan to play in finals. So it's not like we're going to change anything to do it. It's just
No, it's
straight.
a grand
It's
final.
another game. It's week
It's a
20.
grand final. It's a toss of a coin, mate. We've been analysing this game for 45 minutes. It's all rubbish.
Yeah.
On the day, toss a coin. Who knows? They're all going to bash each other for an hour, and
It'd be
it's luck who wins.
It'd be interesting to see how obviously the Crowley-Mitchell matchup. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of talk this week about whether, it'd be interesting to see. In the past, we haven't played Crowley on Mitchell, so it'd be interesting to see whether the line does go down that road or whether they decide to play Crowley on someone else.
Or how quickly they change during the game if someone does get off the chain. Like, I'm not sure what other people are taggable out of that Hawthorn list.
Following
if it's Hodge or...
Following the Ross line rule, I went on to Footy Wire to have a look at the inside 50 stats to see perhaps who he might be thinking about sending Crowley to, because it's often their player who's the most damaging going inside 50. And surprisingly, there was only 1 or 2 Hawthorn players in the top 50 for inside 50s per game, and most of them were about the same. So and in fact, Lewis was the number 1.
Yeah. So if it's not going to be Mitchell, more likely be Lewis, I think, as the alternate.
I think they'll probably look at playing Barlow head-to-head with Sewell, or that sort of type of thing. They'll just say, Barlow, you can get yours, Sewell will get his. They'll play head-to-head, because I don't think they'd want to go head-to-head with Sewell and Fife. So it'd be interesting to see how who they play on Fife, because the interesting thing about Fremantle's ability, particularly in their midfield, is their ability to drag one of the opposing midfielders forward and take marks.
Especially when Fife does.
Yeah.
He's done it many times.
And Barlow rests down forward as well.
Bundy can do it as well.
Yeah, and they're 190 centimetres. So they're going to have at least 6 to 7 centimetres on those guys if they rotate them through and pull them back. And, so it'll be interesting to see how they go in that regard. So it'll be certainly a...
It's a wonderful intricate ballet too, because when they do that, one goes forward, the other one goes back.
Yeah. So interchangeable. The way that we can move just half forward and a half back and get everyone through there.
I've never seen a team with so many midfielders intercepting attacks, at the top of the 50. I've seen Fife do it 10 times in the last 3 games.
Yeah, I know, and that's where his ability, and that's where we're talking about stopping that corridor. And I think it's really going to be important for Fremantle to be able to stop Hawthorn bringing that ball in through the corridor and then exposing us on the far side. A couple of games earlier this year, where teams were able to do that. They were able to, when there was the ruck contest, they bring the ball out 2 or 3 metres defensive side and then push it parallel to the ground, but then they get the extra kick across. Brisbane did it really well against us at Subi earlier this year, and they were able to get quite a lot of kicks on goal.
I think that's Richmond how beat us as well at the MCG from that quick kick to the outside and the run on.
I thought we had a bet on that game, didn't we? Our players were jogging in that match.
And I think, as you said, and I think that run and carry where they can run handball over the top, that's going to be probably an area Hawthorn will try and look to exploit us, because if they can get it over the top, or especially if they get that kick wide, then they get that overlap, it sort of can break.
I don't think they're going to be handballing over the top, mate. And Sydney and Geelong both tried it and got their ass handed to them. Yeah. No, I think you're right. They're going to try and switch. I mean, they'll want to be not even have to look. Just off, straight out.
I agree with you in terms of the switch, but once they switch the ball, then they go over the top. And I think even that game we played Melbourne at the MCG that day, that second quarter, where we dominated in the first quarter, but the second quarter they actually able to kick quite a few goals on us by sort of taking the game on. And I think that's the important thing is for Hawthorn, they'll probably need to take a few risks and take the game on a little bit, and they'll have to back their skills in. Because as you said, if they stop the game. It'll allow Fremantle to play it on their terms, and that's what they probably don't want to happen. So
Yeah, you've got to force Fremantle out of their formation because they're going to stay in it.
yeah. All right. Any other points, boys, you want to bring up before, particularly in this game, before we sort of move on to the last bit for the with the news? Anything else you want to bring up for the game?
Well, I suppose we can all make our guess for the Norm Smith, who we think is going to be able to perform the best on the day, and we'll presume it's going to come from here. So I'm going to put down to say that Fife will be best on ground for us on that day. I think he's got the capabilities of stepping up, and if we're talking about someone that can, be the key for us winning, I think if Fife has a good game, we're going to go a long way to winning. So Fife will be mine for the Norm Smith.
It's hard to look past Fife, isn't it? I mean, it's often it's the inside-out midfielders that command the attention in grand finals.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Andrew. Andrew Embley is the exception that proves the rule there.
Yeah. I think the stat that was interesting today was that if Fremantle kicked more than 12 goals in the game, they're undefeated this season. They're 13 and zip. And I think if we kick more than 12 goals, I think Pav's going to have a big game. So, and I think there's a little bit of that Cinderella story, the loyalty thing. And I just think if Pav does kick 4 or 5 and we kick more than 12 goals and win the game, I think Pav will be the player that will get the nod because he'll just stand out in that type of environment. So,
no, you're right.
Even
if he isn't the best player on the ground, if he's had a good enough game, they'll give it to him if we win.
And, as I said, we won't look at the other options if for the opposing side. So, but I mean, as you said,
I'll be the Warrior Hodge.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see because obviously, there's a lot of great players on both sides. So there's not too many guys when you look at it, even all the way down to the 22nd player. There's not too many guys on there who are pretty poor. And I think generally
one of the stronger grand final 44s we've seen for a while without talking ourselves up too much.
Well, if you look at the bottom, they keep on talking about the bottom 5 and bottom 6 from each side. I think our depth goes right down there to, you don't have any like Mitch Mortons out there this year in terms of guys that are really just...
Mitch Morton playing the grand final.
Well, I think Clark did an analysis, let's say that right, on the Herald Sun this afternoon of ranking the players from 1 to 44 in the whole comp, or like per team, and even Nick Subban, who's been really good for us, I think was ranked 38. Wow. So I think it sort of highlights the depth. So most of the time in grand finals and final sides, it's generally the bottom 5 or 6 players that will determine. It's not going to be your top players; they can sort of make the difference, but it's whether you get exposed by those bottom 4 or 5 players, and so that'll be the interesting thing. I suppose the other interesting thing for Fremantle will be this is the first time they've played in a crowd above 46,000. Most of the time we've never played in a team side bigger than that, and obviously tomorrow or Saturday, as the day is, it will be close to 100.
Double that.
So it'll certainly be interesting to see how obviously they cope with it. But they've got experience there. Just about every player in our coaching squad has played at least in a prelim, and most of them are premiership players. Or have been involved in it, or at least in a grand final. So
I suppose we can't take too much stock into the grand final experience from Dawson and Daniel Pearce. I'm sure he doesn't go around talking about his game with Port Adelaide in the 2007.
Seven. It was 7.
Yeah, that was a bit of a flog. But
you can't talk that grand final experience of those. So basically, everyone's going in except for Dawson as new.
I don't think it really means too much. I mean, most teams that win a grand final, the players in it are first-time winners because most teams don't win multiple flags.
Yeah. And I think the other thing important as well is that a lot of Fremantle's game plan is not based on everything is so structured and every player knows exactly what they're doing. Then the chances of getting it like that nervy type thing will probably be lessened a little bit because everyone just knows exactly what their role is. And the other thing as well is that's really important is that we've had a pretty much an unchanged side for a little while. We've had little changes, but nothing too dramatic. So, and you can't beat that getting that chemistry consistently each week.
Some Kilda game notwithstanding.
Yeah, but I mean...
passing the list management model that's got us here.
Yeah. So, all right, just before we get to the tips, Seppo, any news for those people? Obviously, we've got lots of Fremantle supporters this week who are coming over for either the first time, like Paracleet, or just in town for the game. So any news about what's happening for this week?
Yeah, well, as it's been mentioned on the board, we've got the Big Footy meet-up for all the Freo supporters going to the Great Northern Hotel. So if you're listening to this on a Friday and wanting to know what to do on a afternoon between 4 and 8 o'clock, head down to the Great Northern Hotel. They're going to deck it out in Freo colours, I believe. We're going to have, before the game, they're filming a little segment around 8:30. But from 4 o'clock, once you've finished the grand final parade, if you want to head down, get down to the Great Northern Hotel, which is in North Carlton on Rathdown Street, on the corner of Pigden Street, I believe. I'll be there amongst a lot of the crew, and I hope you can get down there. And the only other thing is I want to thanks to Centurions and Paracleet for coming down to the MCG today to help me finish the banner and get the last bit of preparations and soak up a bit of atmosphere and just being in Melbourne here. It's pretty good to have some big footy crew around.
Yeah, no, it's excellent, and it was interesting just to see all the work that the banner crew go into, and obviously quite a lot. And I think even today when we were waiting around at the G, there was a couple of supporters came up. Seppo, obviously the celebrity that you are, and they're all thanking you for your efforts through the year, particularly for the at the Melbourne games. I mean, everyone listens on the TV, and the efforts that the Fremantle crew squad, in particular, obviously you can hear it through the TV, not nice and loud, and I think obviously you have a lot more support, a lot more soldiers in the army this week. So,
Yep.
And I think and it's interesting to see, like for those people obviously who aren't over in Melbourne, that unless they're a diehard Hawk supporter, the amount of support for Fremantle through the neutrals has been unbelievable. And I think you'll see a lot of the corporates and neutrals on Saturday, especially if Seppo, you get that Freo chant going early. I think we can sort of certainly drown out a lot of those Hawks.
Well, it's going to be great in that M3, the cheer squad bay behind the goals. I know we've got M2 and M4 basically filled with Freo supporters, so it's going to be a great noise made by the 17,000 Freo supporters we're going to have. And judging by the passionate roar you heard in that last quarter of Patterson's, that game, if we're bringing a lot of those passionate people across and add it to our regular Vic cheer squad, we've got something special happening on Saturday afternoon, and I just can't wait for it.
Excellent. And all right, guys, well, we'll finish up there today. I know it's been a little bit longer, but geez, this is one of the. How often have we been? Well, never been in a GF, so we've got to take a little bit of extra time.
19 years.
19 years of waiting.
19 years in the making, this one.
Yeah, so we'll have to soak it up. So, all right, Seppo, what's your tip for the weekend, mate?
Freo by 7 points, and Freo by 7.
Paracleet, how about yourself?
Well, often tipping against us has been effective on this podcast so far, but this time I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to tip Fremantle to beat them comfortably. Fremantle by 28.
Oh, geez. That would be nice, but I think there'll be a few heart palpitations even if it's 7. But you have to go for Freo. I think well, otherwise why am I over here? So, but I think it'll be Freo by. I think it'll be even closer, Seppo. I think it'll be Freo. I think it'll be less than a king. I'm going to go Freo by 5. I'll go early and I'll call Ballantyne for the snap from the corner to win it.
Ooh.
1 point down with a Ballantyne snap to go 5 points up and then go up and give someone a little jab at the end just to get a couple of weeks.
Surely it's going to be pad with Mark 52 out.
I would not want to be witnessing a kick after the sign for this game to be decided either way. I don't think my heart could take it.
No, it will be.
My heart barely survived a preliminary final where we smashed them like a close grand final.
No, it'll certainly be an interesting game, that's for sure. All right, well, as I said, thanks for joining us this week, and let's just hope Fremantle get over the line and we can sort of all bask in the glory. And special shout out to those guys who have come across on the bus. We've sort of heard of quite a bit through Twitter and Big Footy. And
Gil all the way from the States. Can't wait to meet up with you, and should be good. And thanks for everyone for listening this year. We might do 1 or 2 more shows towards the end, maybe a review for next week, and maybe another one through trade week. So if you're still keen to jump on board, we'll more than likely continue this into next year, and maybe one for halfway through the off season to just catch up on things. But thanks to everyone that's been involved in the podcast this year, and Paracleet yourself have come back on a couple of times, and many of the other regulars. It's been great to have you on, and thanks for Centurions for hosting a lot of these we've done throughout the year.
Yeah, and hopefully, and guys, don't be afraid to come on. We're certainly not going to bite anyone's hand off. So if you're interested in coming on, absolutely. And as you said, Seppo, it'd be great to get a chance to catch up with Gil or Stateside Docker for those others tomorrow down at the pub. So if you haven't had a chance, come along and catch up with him. I'm sure he'd appreciate the support and, as I said, following through Twitter and Big Footy. So we'll leave it there, guys. Enjoy the rest of the week. Enjoy the parade tomorrow for those of you who are going. And I'm sure we'll hear the Freo chant all the way along the parade, which will be fantastic. And we'll see those of you tomorrow night at the Great Northern Hotel.
Go Freo.
See you, boys.
Go, boys. Bye for now. Enjoy.